Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of the In a Nutshell podcast, where we go over the Big Ten. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'll be joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over Week 8 of the Big Ten college football season and then preview the upcoming matchups in Week 9. And on Wednesday, we will be doing our full college basketball conference preview. So we're splitting up the sports this week, but that'll probably only be a one-time thing. So, Joe, we're going to go right into the recaps of the games. The first one was the biggest one. That was number 7 Penn State visiting Ohio State, and the Buckeyes defended their home turf with a defensive masterclass. They win the game 20-12, but Penn State scores a touchdown late. What else can you take away from this one other than that Ohio State's defense really brought it?
Yeah, I think you could look at this game, and if you analyze the game for what it is, anyone who watched it could see that Ohio State just has a few more playmakers on offense. I'm certainly not saying that was the only difference, but their offense having Marvin Harrison Jr. to bail them out of a lot of bad situations, a lot of second and longs, and on their final touchdown, you saw they were backed up in an obvious passing down, and they just threw it to Maserati Marv, as Gus Johnson would say. Sorry for that horrible impression to our
It wasn't
listeners,
too
but
bad.
no, could have been worse. But I think the story really falls on Penn State. I think if you really look at the local media there, and if you even hear the beginning of Franklin's press conference, he was kind of giving a referendum question. They pretty much put out to him that he was 1-9 against Ohio State, 4-16 against Michigan and Ohio State combined, and they pretty much really put him against the wall. I don't think that's professional journalism, but to be fair to the journalist, he did state a fact. I think the biggest decision in this game was Penn State going for it on 4th and 3, and I think the biggest criticism I will side with is they hadn't gone for it on 4th and 1 earlier in the game, and their defense was clicking. I don't know why on earth they decided to go for it, but to be fair to James Franklin, had they converted, he would have been a hero. I think Drew Aller did exactly what Ohio State wanted him to do, and that was he was a very young quarterback. Was something like 15-39, 15-40 was at one point he was like 10-30. So Ohio State got him all out of rhythm. I do think the Penn State offensive line did not do a great job protecting Aller, but I would put blame on both the quarterback and offensive line as well as the play calling. I think Jim Knowles really drew up a great game plan, and Penn State did not have any answer or anything, even going into halftime, to counteract it. So, really good win for the Buckeyes. I do think they will be challenged against Wisconsin. We're going to go into that a little later on this show. Penn State has Indiana next, but Sean, Penn State, their entire season is going to be that November 11th game against Michigan, and God forbid they drop a game before that, whether it's to Indiana or Maryland. We could be having a whole different conversation about James Franklin. Not that he's on the hot seat, but Penn State fans were going into Saturday thinking this would be the game that would turn everything around and change the narrative on Penn State football. But Sean, it's just the same old story. It's been the same old story since 2017, and I do feel for our Nittany Lion viewers.
Yeah, it seemed like Ohio State didn't really do anything that should have been unexpected. I think they played well. They didn't play spectacular or anything like that. It was just kind of like, really, Penn State, that's all that you had? This is the game that's been circled on your schedule since you started. And I think they could have put up a little bit of a better effort. But there's a way now that the winner of that Michigan and Penn State game, barring any crazy upsets, will probably be, or if Michigan does win that, then we could talk about long-term things, whether the chances of two teams from the Big Ten being in the college football playoff. But Penn State's probably going to have to be on the wrong end of that one. But we'll go to that team that I just said, Joe. Michigan State rivalry game. It wasn't much of a contest. Michigan came out very businesslike. I think perfect first half, no points given up and 4 touchdowns on the 4 drives. 49-0 final. You got your starters out of there in the end of the third quarter, I believe. This was a big-time performance from the Wolverines.
Yeah, Sean, I think Michigan State did come ready to play. I think their crowd brought it at the beginning. I do think their student section, the deep end, was very impressive. I think there was only a few empty seats. Obviously, we see the empty seats at the end of the first half, but that place was packed. There was a true belief in. I think the only time Michigan was in any sort of danger, if any, was the 3rd and 14 at the beginning of the game on their own 39. But after they converted it to the IU transfer AJ Barter, who along with Holston Loveland and the Michigan tight ends had a stellar performance. Barter was a yard short of 100 yards, and Loveland caught 2 TDs. Regardless, this was about what a lot of people expected. I thought Michigan State wasn't going to make it competitive, but I thought they were going to stick in there for as long as possible. I was dead wrong. Michigan really could have got up 35-0 going into halftime. They were up 28-0. They just snapped the ball too quick on a play to end the first half. Jim Harbaugh, even before the news we got today, he was out for blood. It was, I think, classic Jim Harbaugh. He wanted to run up the score, and at the end, with all the personal fouls and Michigan and other stuff, Michigan was certainly doing some things too. Maybe not to the level of Michigan State. A lot of taunting, a lot of two teams that really just don't like each other, and frankly, I think they have very little respect for one another. But after Michigan State had a late personal foul, probably with like 30 seconds left, Harbaugh lined up the offense. They called off victory formation, and Alex Orji, yes, that's his actual name, ran into the end zone for a statement 49-0. And I think that was a fitting end to how the night went. I think Michigan State was outthought, outcoached, outperformed, and frankly, I think their team does have a lot of talent. But with Simeon Barrow, one of their defensive captains, transferring today, Sean, I think that was just their season. Not to be too punny, in a nutshell, that's about what it was. And I don't think Michigan did anything way too impressive. I think JJ was good, but I mean, it was more the same from two teams that if you paid any attention to them, you would not have been surprised by Saturday.
In McCarthy, you said 4 touchdowns. He had a very good performance. He became the favorite to win the Heisman Trophy Award, according to various sources today. Did a post on the Instagram. He's got slight advantage over Penix and the LSU quarterback, so we'll see how that plays out over these last couple weeks. I think, like you said, Joe, they had 2 long third down conversions early in the game, and it seemed like once they got those, that was kind of the game. So the next game that we'll go to, Joe, was the one with a lot of controversy. We talked about Iowa a ton on here, and that they were looking good the rest of the way. Well, they dropped the first one after we said that at home to Minnesota, 12-10. Nothing really surprising out of that game. Iowa's defense was great. They didn't give up a touchdown, and their offense stunk. But the controversial ending, Cooper DeJean waves his hand in a circle and then catches the punt off a bounce and then returns it to a touchdown. He was ruled that he signaled for a fair catch. From my understanding of the rules, it certainly seems like that should have stood as a touchdown for Iowa.
John, I'm not going to get too far into it. I think there's so many opinions in the Big Ten, and I really want our viewers to make up their own mind on it. I do think DeJean's intentions were not to call a fair catch, so I would definitely agree with that. And the referee's interpretation of it, I guess it's the only one that matters, but I'm going to reserve my opinion. Talking about the game itself, which going off what we just talked about is kind of hard. I don't know how else to say it. This was some of the worst quarterback performances you could have in a game. Both quarterbacks were combined 20 of 53. They threw for under 127 yards each. Deacon Hill did have the interception. And the running game for both teams that were, I would say, pretty respectable, couldn't get anything going. Minnesota, as documented, didn't even score a touchdown in this game. This is another one of these games where, the meme that counts in college football, not every meme is true, but every meme about the Big Ten West shot is absolutely true. The division is as wide open as it's been. And maybe Wisconsin, I said maybe they'd have a stranglehold over it. They might again. I assumed Ohio State, but Minnesota's back in the race. Nebraska's not too far out. We already talked about them in last week's episode. It's just mind-boggling. I have no different conclusion than most of our viewers would have. So I guess my opinion is just telling you that your opinion's not uncommon.
Yeah, the Iowa, we've talked about it before that they need either turnover in the opposition territory or a special teams touchdown or something to win games because they don't score. And when you don't score and the game hangs in the balance and there's no margin for error, you leave yourself so vulnerable to a loss that they really should not have had. When your defense doesn't give up a touchdown, you have got to win the game. It's just as simple as that. We'll talk about how the Big Ten West looks exactly after the last game here, Joe. And not really much to note of it. Wisconsin 25, Illinois 21, other than that Wisconsin now goes back into the lead in the Big Ten West. It's a half point, or not a half point, a half game over Iowa. You mentioned their upcoming test against Ohio State next weekend with Iowa on bye. You can almost certainly say that they'll be knotted right up in the Big Ten West. Iowa with the tiebreaker winning last week. So Wisconsin takes care of business. They win a road game against a team that is not as good as them, but we've got four teams that will think that they have at least a shot at this title.
Yeah, Sean, it's like I said, I think even flipping a coin or doing the dogs pick or the whatever, however random assortments that you learn in statistics class is not going to do it. I think each team has winnable games, except maybe Wisconsin for Ohio State or Minnesota, who also plays Ohio State. And they're all winnable because every game in the Big Ten West is winnable because in a lot of these games, especially against teams like Iowa, 12 points as documented by the Minnesota game, you could probably win. So we'll dive into that later. I think we're not even close to deciding that. And frankly, we might be in a three-team race coming into Thanksgiving weekend, the final week of the regular season. So let's not beat that one to death, Sean.
Iowa with a win against Minnesota here would have really taken control of it, but they didn't. So we're going to be talking about it because nobody really wants it. And honestly, barring a disaster, whoever does end up in the title game is going to be smoked by 30 by Ohio State or Michigan. So, I guess you get to hang a banner and you get to call yourself conference champion, but other than that, it's not going to mean a whole lot. So, Joe, we'll turn the page to Week 9 here. We only have 4 games. Michigan, Iowa, Rutgers, among some other teams, are on bye. But first, we'll go to noon. Indiana, Week 8, Nebraska and Rutgers also did win, but nothing really to note of those games. Indiana at Penn State, noon next Saturday. That'll be on CBS. Penn State, 32-point favorites. Good opportunity for them to get a W after the tough loss last week.
Yeah, Sean, there's no other way to put it. This is kind of whatever game for Penn State fans. They know they're in no danger to lose. Vegas certainly feels that way. I think they're favored by 32 as we sit here tonight. Um, it's kind of funny. It's kind of what Michigan had to do. I'm not comparing Michigan or Penn State. Michigan in 2021 had a very similar game. They lost an absolute stinker to Michigan State and then had to rebound against Indiana. The reason I bring this up, Sean, is I don't know how fired up Penn State could be. I'm not questioning their desire to get better or to be better. I'm just questioning how excited they're going to be and how excited that home crowd's going to be to see a team that just laid an egg on the road play against a 2-5 Indiana team. So I think this is a week for Penn State. They just kind of be business-like because they're next to at Maryland and home against Michigan. That's what's going to define their season. Right now, their season's a disappointing one, and it's very unfair to say a team who's 6-1 in the top 10 is disappointing. But with those expectations they had coming in, this is the biggest whatever game they could possibly have. I'm not going to bump up ratings for CBS. I certainly won't be getting a job there anytime soon based on that. So, Sean, let's move on to the next games.
We've got 2 at 3:30. Both have some ties to the Big Ten West that we are talking about. Michigan State visits Minnesota at 3:30 on BTN. Minnesota 7-point favorites. Pretty similar spot here for Minnesota. I think if they want any hope of winning the Big Ten West, they have to win this game because Michigan State is in free fall. Don't give him an opportunity.
No, Sean, and I hate to bring up the past again, but Michigan State, the week after they lost to Michigan last year, they pulled off the biggest win they had last year, which was at Illinois, who was ranked 16th at the time. Now, I think the circumstances around that is completely different. My point is, Minnesota has to use that, and that has to be played all over the locker room because Minnesota on film was watching, and PJ Fleck said in his press conference today, Michigan just trouts all over Michigan State. And I'm not saying the same thing happened to Minnesota with Michigan, but they also have to put on the film of Michigan State doing some good things. They really should have won at Iowa. They really should have won at Rutgers. It's a team that going into the Michigan game could have easily been 4-2. Now I think Michigan State now is really, really in free fall, but Minnesota can't think that way. They have some challenging games upcoming. I think their game against Illinois and Purdue are winnable. I expect them to win as of today, though I wouldn't guarantee it. The game at Ohio State, barring the miracle of miracles, is going to be a loss. And really, they could set themselves up for having a rubber match versus Wisconsin, winner take all type game for lack of a better term, the final week of the regular season. So, Minnesota, this is probably one of the most. If they win, it would be their most important win, Shaw. But if they lost, this would be the taint on their season and the game everyone points to say what a disappointing year they had. So, they did not off well, but they are right in the thick of things, and they could do something they've never done, which is win a division title and go to Indianapolis.
So the other 3:30 game is Purdue at Nebraska, 3:30 on FS1. Nebraska only 2.5 point favorites here. Interesting to see it that low, Joe. The we talked about it last week. There is a path for Nebraska, and it has to start with a W here against a team that they should be beating.
Yeah, Sean, it's another one of these games where you simply cannot lose if you're Nebraska. Now, I think the situation year one of Matt Rule versus going on year seven of PJ Fleck is completely different. Not that either one is close to the hot seat. My point for Nebraska would be your offense has to perform a lot better, especially I think Purdue's defense is schemed better. We all know the type of defensive coordinator Ryan Walters is, and he's had plenty of experience in the Big Ten from his time in Illinois. There was a lot of things Nebraska has to do better. They did win 17-9, but turnovers continue to plague them, Sean. And the best way to lose at home to a team that you're frankly better than and have more talent than is to turn the ball over. Heinrich Haarberg needs to do a better job passing. He's 9 of 17, 2 picks. Not every pick has been his fault, but he is still that redshirt freshman quarterback that is going to make mistakes. But at this point, it's week 9 of the regular season. He's been in there long enough where he has to take a step up. And their next 2 games are very winnable. You could argue their next 3 games are winnable with Maryland at home, but a loss to Purdue, and they go from competing in the division to probably struggling to make a bowl game, something they haven't done since 2016, Sean.
So those are the 2 3:30 games, and the last game of the day on NBC at 7:30 is number 3 Ohio State visiting Wisconsin. Ohio State needs it to just stay in a position where even with a loss to Michigan, they could still be in college football playoff consideration, and then Wisconsin could honestly shock the world and pull this off and put themselves in prime position to be in the Big Ten West title hunt. But Ohio State, 14.5 point favorites on the road. Joe, Ohio State's got to take care of business here, right?
Yeah, Sean, I think, Luke Fickell today said this Wisconsin-Ohio State game was not about him. In many ways, to Ryan Day, it might be. I've been to Columbus enough times to know that Luke Fickell, who for those who don't know, Luke Fickell is a longtime assistant at Ohio State, was their interim coach in 2011 in between Tressel and Urban Meyer, and was a player there. He's a 3-time state championship winning wrestler from Columbus, DeSales High School. This game is probably very personal to Luke Fickell. I think he really wanted that job in 2018. I know there wasn't much of a search. In fact, Urban did pick Ryan Day to succeed him. But whenever there's a rumor of Ryan Day leaving, and stupidly there's rumors of him getting fired sometimes, Luke Fickell's probably the number one or two name that always pops up. So don't think Wisconsin's not going to have some crazy plays or things up their sleeve in this game, especially when you're trotting Braden Locke out there and not Tanner Mordecai, who is out for the year. I think they're going to have to do a lot of things to catch Ohio State off guard. Frankly, I don't think Penn State did that enough. I think what they did was very predictable, and Jim Knowles had it sniffed out from the beginning. I think Wisconsin has the kind of underdog thing on their side. They really don't have an expectation of winning this game. There's no real pressure to win this game. So I think they have to use that to their advantage. Try to throw a few plays in there that maybe in theory they're stupid, but if they work, you look like a genius. I think one of my favorite quotes is from a guy who works at Locked On Sports. He said, if something's stupid and it works, then it's not stupid. So look for Wisconsin to do that. Look for them to establish the run. That's frankly the only way teams have been able to beat Ohio State. You're not going to win a firefight with them. The path to victory for Wisconsin is scoring first, possessing the ball, keeping Marvin Harrison Jr. off the field. And really, they have to limit Ohio State's running game. Should Ohio State get a running game going, that'll give Kyle McCord a lot more time to throw and a lot more time for Marvin Harrison Jr. to get open. I do not know about Emeka Egbuka's status. You have to figure he'll be back sooner than later. So it's too early to say that on a Monday, but assume that Ohio State's weapons are reared and ready to go after one more week of getting healthy.
So that is our Week 9 preview, and we'll be back next week to recap those games. And as the last week before college hoops starts, we're going to figure out how we're going to navigate through while both of these sports are going on, because it'll be quite a while. It'll be almost 2 months of both sports going on. So, Joe, we've got a couple minutes for some questions here. We're just over 20 minutes. So we'll stick with the football-related questions for today, and then we'll hit the basketball ones on Wednesday. So, Joe, what do you got for us?
Well, Sean, I guess this counts as a football one. There's basketball tied in, but I do enjoy this question from Jim. Jim, it's weird that you have that name as an Ohio State fan, but your parents clearly couldn't forecast the future. Joe, we know you're an undercover operative spy for Michigan football. You've been seen at many Michigan State football games where they haven't been playing Michigan filming. It's really funny. But his actual question is for you, Sean. Do you think there would be any competitive advantage to doing what Michigan is accused of in college basketball? Well, that's a good question.
That's an interesting one. So if exactly what, I don't think so. I mean, maybe early on in the year, but once you get enough film in basketball, you know what the other team runs, and there might be a quick hitter in and out of bounds that you haven't seen, but you know what the other team runs for the most part. So when you hear that signal of whatever the play call is, you know what's coming already. So I don't think there would be that big of an advantage. Teams obviously do put stuff in here and there as the season goes on, but other than like a one-off, but no, I don't think so. You have, from what I'm aware, you can watch film in basketball and you can be at the game and listen to signals, and I don't think basketball changes the signals as much as football probably does. So I wouldn't think there would be much of a competitive advantage there, since you probably already know what's coming after 5 or 6 games into the season.
Yeah, for reference to our viewers, Purdue was the Big Ten tournament and regular season champions. If you needed to spy or send a scout per se to figure out that they're going to give the ball to Zach Edey, you don't belong in basketball, quite frankly.
Nope, you're right. Yeah.
Sean, this one, a lot of Michigan questions coming in. Joe, do you think Michigan will be the death penalty, not the actual death penalty, but figuratively speaking, for their charges? I'm going to side with no. I think today a lot of the news that came out is pretty, I don't want to say damning. I don't think it's good. However, I think there's enough gray area in this where Michigan could perhaps skate away. I do not know whether the accusations are true or not. Frankly, when I hear per sources in today's day and age, I do not know who those sources are. So I would just advise people let the investigation play out. for those jumping the gun saying Michigan's going to be banned from any postseason, me and Sean have acknowledged a million times on this show that college sports unfortunately are driven by money. I do not think, Michigan hypothetically, the NCAA would be jumping at the opportunity to ban them and all the money they'll get from going to the college football playoff. Sean, what's your take on
Yeah,
that?
we won't know. We may never know exactly what happens, but they are not going to do it during the season. It'll be after the season, and from what I can tell, I don't think it's a level 4 infraction, whatever that means, and that'll be a fine and maybe a 1 game suspension next year for Harbaugh, if I had to guess. That's what it seems like now, but as you said, a whole lot of people are saying that they have sources on the situation. So we'll see what happens. I think the rule in general might be changed pretty soon in the age of technology, but I don't think you're going to see much other than a check and maybe a 1 gamer. But yeah, it is what it is, and we'll see. Maybe the NCAA isn't against overdoing it on some of these suspensions, whether it be in football or basketball or any sports. They like to send messages sometimes that are way too harsh, but we'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah, Sean, here's another one. It seems like the news today let out a flurry of theories for Jim Harbaugh, and frankly, other coaches that could apply to in college football. Lincoln Riley, Ryan Day have been previously linked to NFL jobs. Not going to claim those are from inside sources. That's just speculation. But this was for you on your run. We do have a Sports Daily NFL on our network of accounts. What NFL jobs do you see coming open and considering college football head coaches such as Jim Harbaugh, Ryan Day, Lincoln Riley, etc., Dabo Sweeney? You could probably throw in there, maybe.
Well, the first one that came to mind that might be a little bit more secure now than it was a couple weeks ago was the Chicago Bears. And being right in Big Ten country, you would think that a couple of the Big Ten coaches will be the first that they call, how unrealistic that they may be. But you think the Raiders, basically all the bad teams that haven't hired a coach in the last couple of years. But Raiders and Bears would be first come to mind. And then there's a couple other ones, like Patriots might become open soon if Belichick decides to call it quits. But the Bears will be the one that has the most Big Ten influence in it because the quarterback of the Bears, who, from what I can tell, they still believe in a little bit, was Ohio State quarterback. So that would be the one. You'll hear Harbaugh's name every offseason with whatever job is open, but I do think an actual chance of a Big Ten coach will be Chicago.
Yeah, Sean, I also think you could throw perhaps Washington in there.
Rivera
And
might
we're
be
not
gone
trying to
too.
speculate on any NFL coaching jobs per se, but we're saying jobs that perhaps would draw the attention of a Big Ten coach. And frankly, a good enough job to draw a coach like a Jim Harbaugh or Ryan Day or even a Lincoln Riley, who will be part of this conference next year from a USC and Ohio State and Michigan. So, you know, certainly it's the end of October now, so those rumors are going to come about in a month from now when the regular season's all said and done. So, certainly glad that we're discussing it now and getting ahead of the curve. But Sean, that's all we had for questions. Do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, so thank you for tuning in to tonight's edition of the In a Nutshell podcast. Use the code over at Jersey Kings if you haven't already. And we'll be back in 2 days for our Big Ten basketball preview. It'll be a little bit longer than our typical 30-minute ones, so we might have a little bit of a different time where we start, but we'll try and communicate that so we can have as many live viewers as possible and get your questions in to Joe because we have a lot of time for questions at the end on Wednesday. So thank you for